The deal was struck in the dark, where all terrible things are born. King Hrothgar sat on his wooden throne, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. He was a small man, a man of schemes rather than swords, and he was a man who was losing a war. Outside his walls, the armies of the south were gathering like storm clouds. He needed an ally, he needed a weapon, and he knew where to find one. But the price would be high. The messenger from the north stood before him. He was a giant of a man, wrapped in thick wolf skins, smelling of old blood, pine needles, and the frozen sea. "My master accepts your terms," the messenger rumbled, his voice shaking the dust from the rafters. "He will destroy your enemies. He will break their shield walls and burn their ships until the ocean turns black with ash. But he demands the payment up front." King Hrothgar swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked toward the heavy oak door where his daughter was listening, knowing her fate was being sealed. "And the payment is the girl," the messenger said, his voice flat and non-negotiable. "Voror the beast demands a wife. He demands beauty to balance his beast. Give him Princess Elara, and the north is yours. Refuse, and he will watch your kingdom burn with the rest of them." He loved his daughter, in his own selfish, twisted way, but he loved his crown more. "Take her," the king whispered, looking away. "Take her to the frozen hell, but tell Voror, if he breaks his word, I will find a way to kill him." The messenger laughed, a dry, cracking sound like ice breaking. "If you try, little king, he will mount your head on his wall. Have the girl ready at dawn." Princess Elara did not scream when the guards came for her. She did not weep, though her heart felt like a bird trapped in a cage. She was a daughter of kings, raised on stories of duty and sacrifice. She allowed them to dress her in white furs, heavy and suffocating. She allowed them to braid gold into her hair, like a lamb being decorated for the slaughter. But her hands were ice cold. She had heard the stories of Voror. They called him the Beast of the North. They said he was 7 feet tall, with a face so scarred that children cried at the sight of him. They said he ate the hearts of his enemies to gain their strength. They said he had no heart, only a lump of black ice in his chest. She was not going to a wedding. She was going to an execution. The journey north took 2 weeks, and it was a descent into a world she did not know. As they traveled, the soft green fields of her father's lands gave way to gray, jagged rocks, and then to white, endless snow that blinded the eye. The wind became a razor, cutting through her furs, biting at her skin. Finally, the fortress appeared. It was carved directly into the side of a black mountain, towering over a frozen lake. It looked like a skull staring out over the wasteland. Torches burned along the walls, flickering violently in the gale. The gates opened with a groan of rusted iron that sounded like a dying beast. Elara stepped out of the carriage. Her boots crunched on the frozen ground. The courtyard was filled with silent, grim-faced warriors. They watched her not with lust, but with curiosity, like she was a rare tropical bird in a cage of wolves. "So this is the price," a voice boomed from the shadows. Elara looked up. Standing at the top of the stone stairs was the beast. He was massive, a tower of muscle and dark iron plate that seemed fused to his body. He wore no helmet. His hair was long and black, matted with braids and trophies, but it was his face that held her gaze. The left side was handsome, sharp and noble, a glimpse of the man he might have been. But the right side was a ruin, a landscape of twisted, melted scar tissue, the legacy of some terrible fire long ago. One eye was blue and piercing, the other was milky white and blind. He walked down the stairs. The ground seemed to shake with each step. He stopped in front of her. He smelled of smoke, cold steel, and loneliness. He reached out a hand clad in a gauntlet of black metal, and tilted her chin up. Elara trembled, but she did not look away. She forced herself to stare into his good eye. "You are small," Voror rumbled. His voice was deep, like stones grinding together deep in the earth. "You will freeze here. You are too fragile for this world." "I am stronger than I look, my lord," Elara whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. Voror snorted, a puff of steam escaping his lips. "We shall see. Take her to the tower." "Do not touch her. If any man harms her, I will flay him alive and hang his skin from the gates." He turned and walked away, his cape billowing behind him. He did not offer her a welcome. He did not offer her a smile. He had bought a wife, and now he was going back to war. The first month was a prison of silence. Elara lived in the high tower. Her room was warm, filled with thick furs and a roaring fire, but it was a cage. She saw Voror only at dinner in the great hall. He sat at the head of the long wooden table, tearing into his meat, drinking dark ale from a horn, ignoring her completely. He spoke to his captains, planning raids, discussing grain stores, mapping out the destruction of her father's enemies. He seemed to forget she was there. But Elara was not a woman to sit and wait for death. She began to explore. She walked the cold stone corridors. She went to the kitchens. She went to the stables. She realized something strange. The servants did not fear Voror. They respected him. When he walked by, they didn't cower. They nodded. They looked at him with loyalty. One day, she saw him in the courtyard. A young stable boy had let a massive warhorse loose by accident. The horse was panicked, kicking wildly, threatening to crush the boy. In her father's court, the boy would have been whipped for incompetence. Elara watched from the balcony, holding her breath. Voror stepped forward. He didn't shout. He caught the horse's halter with one hand, holding the beast still with sheer strength, calming it with a few low, rumbling words. Then he looked at the terrified boy. "Moi yourself, boy," Voror said gently. "Fear makes the hands shake, and shaking hands make mistakes. Breathe. Try again." He didn't strike the child. He taught him. Elara felt a crack in her fear. A monster does not teach, she thought. A monster destroys. A monster takes. That night, at dinner, she did something brave. The hall was quiet, save for the crackling fire. She stood up and poured wine into his cup. Voror looked at her, surprised, his hand hovering over his axe. "I am not a servant," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. "I am your wife. If we are to live in this frozen hell, we will speak. I will not be a ghost in your home." Voror stared at her for a long moment, his good eye narrowing. Then, for the first time, the corner of his scarred lip twitched. "Speak then, little bird. What does a princess of the green lands have to say to a monster?" "I want to know how you got your scars," she said. The great hall went silent. The captains stopped eating. They looked down at their plates. Voror's face darkened. He touched the ruined skin on his cheek. "Fire," he said simply. "My father was a cruel man. He liked to burn things. He liked the sound of screaming. One night, he decided to burn my mother because she spoke out of turn. I pulled her out. I was a boy. I saved her, but the fire took its tithe." Elara's heart ached. "You saved her. She died of the smoke," Voror said, his voice hollow and old. "But I killed my father that night, and I took his throne. That is why they call me Beast, not because of my face, but because I killed my own blood. I am a kinslayer." Elara reached out across the table. She placed her small, pale hand over his massive, scarred fist. "That does not make you a beast, Voror," she whispered. "That makes you a king." Voror looked at her hand. Then he looked at her eyes. The ice in his chest shifted. Winter deepened, and with the snow, something changed between them. Voror began to take her riding. He showed her his world. He showed her the frozen waterfalls that looked like crystal cathedrals. He showed her the herds of wild elk moving like a gray river across the plains. He showed her the northern lights dancing like green ghosts in the sky. He was not a man of poetry. He did not recite verses, but his actions spoke louder than words. He made sure her cloak was tight against the wind. He stood between her and the storm. He broke the ice on the river with his bare hands so her horse could drink. One evening, sitting by the fire in the library, Elara was reading a scroll. Voror was sharpening his axe, the rhythmic sound filling the room. "My father," Elara said softly, "he thinks you are a weapon. He sold me to you so you would fight his war." "I know," Voror grunted, not looking up. "I sent my armies south yesterday. Your father will have his victory. The south will fall." "Why?" Elara asked. "Why fight for a man who hates you? Why bleed for a man who calls you a monster?" Voror stopped sharpening. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his good eye. "I do not fight for him, Elara. I fight for the price he paid." He stood up and walked to her. He knelt, a giant kneeling before a doll. He took her hand, his callous skin rough against her soft palm. "You are the price, and you are worth 1,000 wars." Elara leaned forward and kissed his scarred cheek. He stiffened, shocked, then relaxed, closing his eyes. Voror and Elara rushed to him. "My lord," the rider gasped. treachery. The king, King Hrothgar, speak. Voror roared, grabbing the man by the tunic. Your army. They destroyed the southern enemies. The rider choked out, blood bubbling from his lips. But while your men were celebrating the victory, Hrothgar's archers, they slaughtered them. They killed them in their sleep. They burned the tents. Voror's face turned to stone. Elara gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. And now, the rider whispered, his eyes fading, Hrothgar is marching here. He has united with the south, he says. He says he is coming to rescue his daughter from the monster. He has 10,000 men. We have 500. The rider died. Silence fell over the courtyard. A silence heavier than the snow. Voror stood up. He radiated a cold, terrifying rage. He turned to Elara. He betrayed me, Voror whispered. He used my men to win his war, and now he comes to bury me. He is my father, Elara cried, tears streaming down her face. I will talk to him. I will tell him the truth. He does not care for truth. Voror roared, striking a stone pillar with his fist, cracking the rock. He wants the north. He never intended to let you stay. You were just the bait. You were currency. Voror looked at his captains. Bar the gates, sharpen the axes. We die tonight. The army of King Hrothgar arrived at sunset. 10,000 torches lit up the valley. They surrounded the fortress like a sea of fire. Hrothgar rode to the gates, flanked by his generals. Voror, the king shouted, "Come out, beast! Return my daughter, and I will make your death quick." Voror stood on the ramparts. He looked down at the massive army. He knew he could not win. He turned to Elara. He was wearing his full war armor now. He looked terrifying, a true god of war. "There is a tunnel," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "It leads from the crypts to the forest. Take a horse. Go. Run." "No," Elara said, grabbing his arm. "I am not leaving. You must," Voror said, cupping her face with his scarred hand. "They will kill me, Elara." "I cannot stop them, but I can hold them long enough for you to run. I am your wife," Elara shouted, her voice echoing off the stones. "I am the lady of this fortress. If you die, I die beside you." Voror looked at her with a mixture of agony and pride. "You are a foolish woman," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "But you are my heart." The attack began. Catapults launched massive stones against the walls, shattering the ancient masonry. Archers rained fire arrows into the courtyard. Voror led the defense. He was a whirlwind of death. He stood at the broken gate, his massive axe swinging, cutting down man after man. For the north, he screamed. For the queen. His men fought with the fury of demons. They held the gate for hours, but they were outnumbered 20 to 1. Slowly, they were pushed back. Voror was bleeding from a dozen wounds. An arrow stuck from his shoulder. His armor was dented. He retreated to the great hall, his remaining 50 men forming a circle around him. Elara stood by the throne, holding a dagger. Her white dress was stained with soot and blood. The doors of the hall burst open. King Hrothgar walked in, surrounded by his elite guards. He stepped over the bodies of the northern men. "It is over," Hrothgar sneered. He looked at Voror, who was leaning on his axe, breathing heavily, barely standing. "Look at you, a broken dog." Hrothgar looked at Elara. "Come here, girl. The nightmare is over. Daddy is here." Elara looked at her father. She saw the greed in his eyes. Then she looked at Voror, bleeding and broken, ready to die for her. She walked down the steps of the throne. She walked past Voror. She stood in front of her father. "You are right," Elara said, her voice cold as the north wind. "The nightmare is over." She raised her dagger. Hrothgar laughed. "Put that away, child. You will hurt yourself." "You lied," Elara said. "You murdered honor. You betrayed the man who saved your kingdom." "I did it for you," Hrothgar shouted, "to save you from this monster." "He is not the monster," Elara screamed. "You are!" And then she did the unthinkable. She did not attack her father. She turned and threw the dagger to Voror. "Voror, fight!" Voror caught the dagger in his offhand. His axe was in the other. He looked at Elara. He saw the fire in her eyes. The pain left his body. The fatigue vanished. The beast roared. It was a sound that shook the dust from the rafters. He charged. He moved faster than a man of his size should be able to move. Hrothgar's guards stepped forward, but Voror smashed them aside like toys. He took a sword through the thigh, but he didn't stop. He reached the king. Hrothgar's eyes went wide. "Wait," the king pleaded, stumbling back. "I can give you gold. I can give you land." Voror grabbed the king by his royal cloak and lifted him into the air. "I already have the only thing I want," Voror growled. He threw the king. Hrothgar flew across the hall and crashed into the stone table, lying unconscious and broken. The giant beast stood before them, covered in blood, glowing with rage. And beside him stood the princess, holding a sword she had picked up from a dead man, her eyes daring them to come closer. "Drop your weapons," Elara commanded, "or you will all die here." They looked at the pile of dead bodies at the gate. They looked at the fierce queen. They dropped their swords. Clatter, 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 clatter. Silence returned to the fortress. Voror sank to his knees, his strength finally failing him. Elara rushed to him, tearing strips from her dress to bind his wounds. "Stay with me," she whispered, crying, pressing her hands against his bleeding chest. "Do not dare die on me, beast." Voror opened his good eye. He smiled, a true smile this time. King Hrothgar did not die, but he was stripped of his crown. He was sent to a monastery in the south to live out his days in silence and shame. Elara and Voror united the kingdoms. He did not rule from the soft south. They ruled from the fortress of the north. Legends say that Queen Elara never wore silk again. She wore furs and armor, and Voror, the beast, never wore his mask again, because the only person whose opinion mattered thought he was beautiful. And so, the beast and the beauty ruled, not with fear, but with a loyalty that was forged in fire and ice.